partially just because I had a friend from college who graduated and actually got deported because he couldn't find a job, so he got sent back to New Zealand.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Cast and Spear podcast. This is John, and today we have back on the show Luke Ofgard from Caught Off Guard, and he's going to dive into some of his favorite places he's been fortunate enough to travel around the world. And before we get started, if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the podcast so you never miss a future episode. All right, get your passports ready. Let's take a trip. Please welcome back Luke Ofgard.
So I've been privileged to fish, as you mentioned, all over the world. I've fished in about 20 U.S. states and 5 countries. I have plans to go to at least 4 more countries in about 2 months' time. But so far, I've really enjoyed having the opportunity to travel. Unfortunately, most of my international travel has not been dedicated to fishing. It's like, hey, I have to go here for work, or I have to go here for whatever else. I'm going to bring a fishing pole along. So I have to say the most disappointing international venues for fishing would have to be Spain and Portugal. I went there. I'm a teacher, and so I went there with a trip that was basically for my master's degree relating to teaching. We got some credits for it. We got to travel. It was paid for by National Geographic. I was like, hey, this is an amazing opportunity, and I brought my fishing pole along. Unfortunately, Spain was basically deforested when they built the Spanish Armada, and they never replanted. The way they manage their water there is tragic. You know, you have entire systems that have been rediverted and are now dry, where these native species were, either driven to extinction or now only exist in 1 or 2 systems. Basically, long story short, Spain and Portugal are not friendly fishing destinations. Portugal, you need to have a bank account in that country if you want to purchase a fishing license. They're really cheap, but without what's called a multi-banco card, which is their own system of ATMs that you can only access if you have a Portuguese bank account, you have to go through a guide. So I did that, went through a British guide. We went fishing for a fish called Andalusian barbel. They look a lot like a carp for the American angler, but they're awesome, man. These things get aerobic. They get, much bigger than most trout do. They fight really hard. You can catch them on the fly. And I was really excited about this. Long story short, it was not a great experience. The guy was really nice, but he said, he'll fish 2 or 3 weeks worth of fishing before he finally catches one, just because the fisheries are so poorly managed. Moving over to Spain, it's hot, it's dry, it's a desert. There's not a lot of native species left because of the poor management. They do still have some really cool fish over there, but if you want to catch, big European carp or other species available, you might as well just move up to France, go fish the Rhine, catch your 100-pound carp up there, because Spain and Portugal, not great fishing destinations. Another really cool place, on the other hand, moving aside from those that I visited, which was partially for fishing, partially just because I had a friend from college who graduated and actually got deported because he couldn't find a job, so he got sent back to New Zealand. I went down there. New Zealand has this reputation as being blue ribbon trout water everywhere you look, and some of that's true. New Zealand's a really cool place. It's different. So basically, if you're familiar with Seattle and their whole $15 minimum wage, how that drove the price of everything up when they implemented that, well, New Zealand did that like 25 years ago. So, you go down to New Zealand and don't expect anything to be cheap. So it's an island where they have, a very, very high cost of living as it is. But, they have this pseudo-socialist government, which makes it a great place to live if you're a resident there. But if you're a tourist, it means it's very expensive. So, you're talking about $8.50, $9 a gallon for gas. You're talking an average of about $12 to $15 for a cheap meal. Fast food doesn't have a value menu. They don't give you refills on anything down there. We went to a Wendy's and it was like $13 for, what would be about $3.50 here in the States. So it's not cheap. It's very expensive. That being said, it's a really cool place. There's less people in New Zealand than there are in the entire state of Oregon where I live. And so that alone was an awesome experience. There's a lot of beautiful scenery down there. You get to see a really wide contrast of, landscapes. You're going to look at like the Tasman Sea, where it's just, glass calm. We were sea kayaking out there, fishing for things like snapper and mackerel from the kayaks. We ran out of bait, and so we parked on this island, and it happened to be the heat of the summer. and we just went around catching cicadas. We could hear them, so we just put those on our jigs and started using those instead of squid and shrimp, and they worked just as well. We caught snapper all day long. Down there, it's a fish called either the pink snapper or the Australasian snapper that you're catching. There's one and the same. If you Google New Zealand snapper, it's what you're going to see. They're really pretty fish. They taste really good. They are everywhere. They're about 90% of the nearshore biomass, so there's not a whole lot of saltwater diversity down there. So that's mostly what you're going to catch. We also caught a few things like smaller trevally. We caught fish called John Dory, which are kind of cool looking. Things like the blue cod. Lots of different species out there, just not a whole lot close to shore. But nobody goes to New Zealand to fish the salt anyway. Everybody goes there to fish the freshwater, right? Well, we were on the North Island, and we fished the North Island really extensively. The South Island is where the truly phenomenal trout fishing is supposed to be, but that's places where you're helicoptering in to this remote river, and you're one of maybe 6 people who gets to fish it that year. So those are infinitely more expensive. The country is already substantially more expensive than anywhere in the U.S. And then, you go to the South Island, you're having guided trips. You can't fish anywhere on the South Island, more or less, outside of the cities unless you do have a guide or private land access. So we decided to just do our best on the North Island. And we ended up focusing most of our trout fishing near a town called Rotorua, which happens to be the sister city of Klamath Falls, Oregon, where I live. And that was part of the appeal of going there. And the city was
I've
really
been there. That place is. I wanted to move there.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
What were you there for?
I spent 2 months in New Zealand after college. So it's kind of funny how you're explaining it's very expensive. I was there right after the crash, the economic downturn, and it was like 3 to 1. It was almost the cheapest place I've been to
Really?
at the time. Yeah, because it was about, the dollar was about double Australia and almost like 2/3 New Zealand at the time.
No joke.
So it was kind of like, wow, we're getting such a deal. But now it, I'm sure it just skyrocketed back. I haven't checked what the exchange rates are, but it's kind of like, wow, I got there at a good time. Yeah, I was there. I did about a month in each island, and the South Island, I have fond memories. Queenstown was my favorite. Just doing like the bungee jumps and all the extreme stuff. But I don't want to detract from your thing. I just thought it was cool that I've never heard anybody say Rotorua, because that was one of my favorite spots. It was like a nice little, expensive for the houses, but it was like a nice little beach community tucked away in the greens. It was really cool.
That is really cool. So yeah, funny you mentioned that. We did things, we did the Auckland Bridge bungee, and we did a lot of sea kayaking, and Rotorua had this really cool setup that was ziplining through the trees. It was like
Yep, I have a video of myself doing that. It was super fun.
Oh yeah?
Yep.
Yeah, man, that was awesome. It was like 8 miles of zip lines, and you did some walking in between, and it was just a really good time. We did some trout fishing around Rotorua. It's from the research we did, that's sort of like the epicenter of trout fishing on the North Island. And there was some good trout fishing. Don't get me wrong. It was very good. And outside of where I live, it was as good as I've ever seen for rainbow trout that are mostly wild. We didn't catch a whole lot of browns. We didn't catch a single tiger. That was sort of the appeal of where we were fishing. A couple of the places we were by, they had a pretty good tiger stalking program. So again, we knew they were stocked, but tigers are sort of the exception to the don't fish for hatchery trout rule, because all tigers are hatchery trout because they can't reproduce in the wild. Unfortunately, we didn't get any of those, but the average fish we were catching was probably about 14 to 16 inches, fat, healthy, really, really pretty fish. But it was nothing like, where I'm from, the Klamath River. So I remember our best day, we had like a 20 fish day each. And, my best day here, I can triple that pretty easily, in the Klamath River. And the fish are comparably sized. We didn't catch any monsters down there. And we were fishing big lures, the same stuff I have here. We were trying some local stuff. We actually got these weird, interestingly shaped spoons, which look most like a crocodile, I guess, if I had to describe them. They were just some local flavor in Rotorua, and we called them kiwi spoons. And they worked pretty well there, no better than Rapalas. But interestingly enough, I brought them back here, and they are one of the more effective spoons I've ever used. And unfortunately, I've never been able to find them online. But if I ever can, I'd love to make it back just to buy those four. They're about 4.5 inches long, really narrow and thin, and painted on one side, and either gold or silver on the other. But yeah, New Zealand was a bit of a disappointment in terms of the trout fishing. Again, that's just because it was where we were fishing was the best that basically public fishing had to offer in New Zealand. And if you want to do the South Island, it's a lot of the, helicopter in or buy a guide or pay for the access fee. And so that was not quite what I was expecting, but still worth the trip. And if you've never fished the Klamath Basin, then you probably won't be disappointed by the trout fishing down there. And it would definitely be worth the trip. Let's see here. As far as a lot of other international fishing, places that I really want to go, oh man, there's so many that I want to go to, but I would have to say right near the top of the list would have to be Mongolia. I would love to go chase those, massive taimen, largest member of the Salmonidae family, the biggest trout around. Basically, they can get up to 200 pounds, and they've been recorded getting even bigger. So Mongolia is definitely near the top. Believe it or not, where they don't fly fish for those, the guides will shoot a ground squirrel or a prairie dog for you, a little 6 to 8 inch critter, and put it on a hook, and that's what they use. So it's very different, and part of the prudish trout fishing elitist in me dies a little bit when I hear that. But at the same time, I'm like, man, that would be so awesome exactly for that reason. So Mongolia is on the list.
I think I'm kind of shocked that in New Zealand, mice, that's what they eat is mice over other fish.
Right.
For a majority. And that's just crazy now that Mongolia, of course, would have squirrels instead of mice.
It makes sense, right?
That's crazy.
It really is. A couple other places, like for trout, I would love to go to Iceland and fish for, the massive Arctic char that they have up there, and then, white spotted char as well. The only downside with Iceland and with basically anywhere in Europe, with the exception of Portugal, one good thing they had is no trespass laws, so you can fish private land anywhere without getting in trouble. Most of Europe doesn't have the whole licensing system that we're used to in North America. In Canada and in the States, you buy a license for that state and you can fish anywhere. If you're on private land, you just can't fish there unless you have permission. Well, in most of Europe, you buy licenses for the specific body of water or the specific, region that you're fishing in. So it might give you access to 1 or 2 or 3 streams, but in extreme places, it might be even more narrow than that. So I have a trip planned to go visit my brother, who's currently in Vienna finishing up his degree as a foreign exchange student there. And it's going to be midwinter, so it's not ideal for fishing, but I'm going to be fishing in Croatia. I'm going to be fishing in Italy, Austria, and Slovenia, which is where my mom's side of the family's from. And so I'm really excited. I was hoping I might get a fish for marble trout, which is a beautiful species only found in a few countries there in Eastern Europe, but I'll miss the season for that. But I am going to get to go fish for huchin, which are closely related to the taimen that they have, or the taimen, I'm not actually sure how to say it, that they have in Mongolia. It's actually the only living relative. And they don't get nearly as big, but they can still hit about 50 pounds, with the average fish being more like 5 to 10. So that's about 6 weeks away, and I'm really excited for that. I'm going to get over to Slovenia and Croatia, fish for huchin. Going to probably take a few charters out in the Mediterranean, hopefully get into some salmon, some tuna, or some of the other exotic species that they have. Believe it or not, they have things like mahi-mahi, just like we have here. Over there in the Mediterranean Sea. So I'm really excited for that, and hopefully it'll work out, even though it's midwinter. But yeah, so many other destinations to mention. I'd love to go to, Guyana someday and fish the Amazon. I'd love to go to Argentina, fish those, artificial invasive salmon and trout runs that they stocked where they don't have any competition and just get massive. I'd love to go fish for those freshwater sharks in South Africa, for tigerfish as well in South Africa. Just so many things to choose from. Australia, didn't make it over to Australia when I was down under, but there's a couple systems down there where you can go catch 75 fish theoretically in a day in a freshwater system, which is just unheard of species diversity outside of the Amazon. And, a ton of them are huge. You have fish like the sawfish, which are, 6 to 10 feet long. So lots of plans in the future. The most ready one, I would say, is that trip to Eastern Europe in mid-December to primarily target hoochin, but a couple of other species are definitely on the agenda as well.
Now you just made me have the travel itch. I actually just came back from Iceland probably about a month ago. So
How was it?
It was great. It's expensive.
Gotcha.
So it makes me sound, everything you said about New Zealand is how I felt about Iceland. We actually did
Gotcha.
it really smart. We went right after we landed, we went to Costco and loaded up on all the, bulk goods.
That's
Such
brilliant.
as like fruit, all the necessities, and then it was
Yeah.
chilly, so you can leave it in your car and not really need to have a refrigerator. But we went kind of late summer, so it wasn't super cold yet. So it still had greenery, it had all that stuff, but it's tiny, man. We're talking 330,000 people for the whole country. So it's like, yeah, it's like one main road, and it goes in a circle around the island. And I didn't have a chance to do any fishing at the time, but what you were saying is totally right. I looked at, well, when we were leaving, I looked at like the license kind of rules and stuff, and I was like, this is kind of a nightmare in terms of figuring this whole shebang out. But yeah, that's cool, man. I can't wait to hear about your stories when you come back.
Definitely. I'm excited. Shore. We'll see how it goes, man.
Well, that does it for this episode of the podcast. How'd you enjoy it? Are you getting the travel itch? Got to get some more stamps on that passport? I sure feel it. I'm already looking at Kayak and seeing what I can afford to travel to in January. Well, yesterday was Thanksgiving, and I just want to say I'm very thankful for you to spend your time with me to listen to this podcast. As we're getting started, I want to expand it as fast as possible to as many people and inspire people to do more fishing and taking care of the environment. If you have a moment, if you can do me a huge favor and screenshot whatever app you're using to listen to this and send it to a couple of your fishing buddies, let's say 3, that would be huge. Maybe even share it on your social. Just make sure you tag me at Cast and Spear. And be sure to check in tomorrow for the last episode with Luke Offguard. Keep those lines tight, everyone. See ya.